Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Hey man, cut off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth.
What you know good, Ann Camp? You're listening to the Ann Campaign's Church Politics Podcast with Justin Giboney, a.k.a. Bishop Cooper's grandson. Now, oftentimes we start off these episodes with some sports talk. But since my Bears and my Commodores took some embarrassing losses, we're not going to talk about that today. And I'll be honest with you, that's part of y'all's problem. All you want to do is talk about sports and all that when we got serious stuff to talk about. So I'm going to talk about something else this week. I'm not going to talk about football. And as the sole host of this show at this time, that's my prerogative. All right, we're not talking about football this week. We're going to get into politics immediately. And since we're going to get into politics immediately, let's talk about what's going on right now. Because we're just over a week past the presidential election, a very eventful presidential election. And we're still officially in what I would call cope season. Cope season is when partisans and sometimes everyday people who were emotionally tied to the election but lost try to find ways to deal with the outcome. And this is just normal human emotion. I don't think these people are bad. I'm not doing this to make fun of anybody, but that's just what it is. We're in cope season. How do I deal with losing this very consequential election? People are trying to find that out. How do they process it? How do they make sense of it? And how do they, to some extent, get over it? And we do want everybody to get over it. We don't want people suffering, for months on end, years on end because of this presidential election. So people are coping, trying to figure that out. I get it. I've been there before. I'm not there this time. I wasn't as emotionally tied. I had my opinions of who I wanted to win and all that stuff, but I wasn't as emotionally tied as it seems like some people are, but I have been before. Now, the unfortunate thing about cope season is it often involves avoiding certain parts of reality that we just don't want to deal with. It often involves refusing to adjust our fixed narratives, blaming everyone except ourselves and the people that we like or the people that we kind of put our stamp on. This is all part of trying to cope with an electoral loss and the fact that the people that we hold in contempt actually won. And that's a big part of it, right? This is in politics, you have some major rivalries. The reason that people get emotional about politics is because, especially in this day and age, we're motivated by, who we're against. When the people that we're against win, it is not easy to cope with the fact that for the next 4 years or so, they're going to be in power. It's not easy to deal with. I don't think that's easy for any human being to deal with. So you have a whole bunch of people coping in different ways. Some of the main cope that I've seen is you have people blaming disinformation, blaming Trump, or blaming the conservative media, saying that they tricked everyone into supporting them. And I'm going to get into a little bit later on in this episode why disinformation it's a thing, but why that can become very condescending and arrogant. All right, so we'll talk about that a little bit. Then you have the people who say it's all racism and sexism. That's the only explanation we have. We know that America has dealt with racism and sexism for a long time, and this just proves that we haven't really made any progress. Now, these people don't want to necessarily deal with the fact that millions of the people that voted for Trump this time, whether we like it or not, voted for Obama. Some of these people voted for Hillary, but somehow that doesn't matter because that particular narrative, and this is a big part of COPE. A big part of COPE is protecting your narratives. What narrative do I see in society that I want to protect because it justifies everything that I believe? And so this narrative that it was just racism and sexism is one that a lot of people are holding on to. Now, you won't hear me say that played no part in the conversation. I'm sure there are people who are motivated by that. Do I think that most people, even if they voted for Obama and Hillary, were motivated by that? I would say not. I think people are leaning on that a little too heavily. And we can look at a lot of reasons why that's probably not the number one motivating factor, although I wouldn't say that it didn't play a role at all. Other people are saying that it's completely Biden's fault, that Biden should have got out earlier and given Kamala a chance to kind of define herself and all those things, or should have gotten out and allowed there to be a primary. Well, a lot of people who are saying that are the same people that were part of covering up the fact that he probably wasn't in a state where he should have been running at that time. So I think that's an interesting part of the COPE as well. Now, from Christians, some Christians, I've even seen a lot of spiritual takes that provide one explanation or another based on a spiritual basis. And there may be something there. I do kind of advise Christians to be careful with that, right? To be using spiritual explanations as a form of COPE. You gotta be careful. Take your time, be prayerful, read the Bible. We can't just jump on every spiritual explanation that we get for something. All right. Test the spirit, in other words. And as I said on the last premium episode, especially when it comes to the racism and sexism conversation, which is a real conversation. I don't mean to downplay it. I think it can be overstated, but I don't mean to downplay it. I do think it's a bad idea because you hear people saying, you get a lot of unhinged takes about now I hate this group or I hate that group, or I don't care what happens to this group or that group because they didn't vote for who I wanted them to vote for. That should never be the take of a Christian. All right. And I think it's a bad idea to take other people's votes and to take elections and to take that personally. Right. Again, that can lead to a lot of unhinged activity. Don't take somebody else's vote for a candidate and you weren't the candidate personally, as if was a personal assault or a personal insult to you. That's usually not the case. And you're only hurting yourself by taking it that way. That's just my take on it. Okay. So we are in COPE season, and allow people, like, guys, you don't have to argue with everybody who is trying to cope with this particular election. And let me tell the people who supported Trump, if the shoe were on the other foot, you would be coping right now. You'd probably have some copes and some explanations that made you feel a little better, but weren't necessarily realistic either. So I'm asking folks who may not be coping as much to have some grace on people who are coping. You don't have to debate every point. Let people get through it in the best way that they can. Now, that doesn't mean you have to go along with it, but at the same time, debating people who are coping usually doesn't go all that well. It's usually not all that fruitful. That's just been my experience. Okay? Just my experience. That's all I can say. All right? Well, as usual, so we're talking about COPE season. I'll get into a little bit more of that later in the episode. But as always, guys, I got to give a shout out to all our patrons and supporters for supporting us in what we do and how we do it. If you are watching on YouTube, which our YouTube numbers have finally been growing, which is music to my ears. But if you're watching on YouTube, make sure that you like and subscribe. We're trying to get this up. All right. But I appreciate the folks who support us. We're kind of a niche in a way organization. You really have to understand what we're getting at to appreciate this podcast. And there's things that are said on this podcast, always with love, always with respect, that are not smiled upon by a polite society. And so it takes a special type of patron, a special type of supporter to support what we're doing and become part of this movement. But this movement is needed, and you can help us spread the word a lot further. You can be part of spreading the word by helping us out on this. Okay, guys? and campaigns trying to raise money for our Civic Revival 2.0. That email just went out yesterday. You can find some of that information on our website. Help us out so next year we can spread the word. And really, for people who are feeling hopeless right now, give them some hope, get them involved, and help them make some change. You can be a part of that. So if you want to be a patron, you can go on patreon.com/churchpolitics, patreon.com/churchpolitics. And if you give monthly, you'll be able to get premium episodes. You'll be able to ask me questions, and we'll answer some of those questions on episodes that everybody else doesn't get. Okay. So for instance, after I finish this episode, I'm going on to the premium episode, and I'm going to talk about the role that money and celebrities played in this particular election. I think it's going to be interesting. And for those of you that are premium subscribers, you should be looking forward to that. But that's just an example of what we do. And when you become a patron, you get those episodes. I greatly appreciate you. But we got a lot of stuff to talk about, as I said. So grab your Bible, get your mind right, and prepare to think, not like a Republican, not like a Democrat, but to think like a Christian. All right, y'all, let's go to the word. I want to go to Proverbs 16:32. Proverbs 16:32, and it says, "Better a patient person than a warrior, one with self-control than one who takes a city." The Bible talks quite a bit about composure. And we've been talking about cope season, how people are reacting to disappointment, reacting to a difficult situation and trying to get through it. And I want to urge all the Christians out there to try to deal with this with composure, prayerfully, in the word, in Christian community, but also with composure. And if you have composure, some of the things you won't be doing is posting all kind of crazy stuff on social media, arguing with everybody that disagrees with you. Sometimes you just got to step back and say, let me honestly look at what happened and deal with this in a self-controlled way. I think that'll say more about you than even developing some great argument to go against somebody who you disagree with at this moment, to show that you have composure, to show that you have self-control, and sometimes just listen as you try to figure out what's actually going on. Now, with every election, there comes a fallout after the election, right? And the reason that there's a fallout after the election is, let's face it, people put a lot of time, a lot of resources, and a lot of faith into these elections. Now, it's my opinion that people put too much faith into these elections. But when you invest those things into an election, there's going to be cope, there's going to be a fallout, especially within whichever party loses the presidency. There's always this circular kind of like firing range when it comes to people, when it comes to the party who lost the election. They're going to be saying it was your fault. No, it was your fault. Everybody's pointing fingers. Nobody wants to take the blame for what happened. And so, predictably, that's exactly what is happening inside of the Democratic Party. And two of the sides that are going at it are the establishment versus the populist left. Now, I don't think anybody in the Democratic Party represents the establishment better than Nancy Pelosi, who used to lead the Democrats in the House and really may not be the House Speaker or the minority leader right now, but she still runs the Democratic Party in the House and beyond the House, because she may be one of the first House members who's not even really in leadership that got the president to sit down. That's a lot of power. And so she's a representative of the Democratic establishment. Someone who represents the populist left, because I think that's who's fighting with the establishment right now, is Senator Bernie Sanders. And Senator Bernie Sanders has some choice words about the Democratic establishment after the election. And I want you to listen to these words, and we'll be right back.
I want to start with the scathing response that you gave after the Democrats lost, Kamala Harris lost pretty big. You said the Democrats abandoned the working class. The chairman of the DNC called it straight up BS and said Joe Biden is the most pro-worker president of my lifetime. Former Speaker Nancy Pelosi said she disagreed with you. She added, quote, Bernie Sanders has not won. Do you stand by what you said?
Oh, absolutely. Look, Joe Biden is a friend of mine. I've been proud to work with him on an agenda which has been very strongly in favor of the working class. Biden promised to be the most progressive president since FDR. In many ways, on domestic issues, I think he kept his word. But here is the reality. The working class of this country is angry, and they have a reason to be angry. We are living in an economy today, Donna, where the people on top are doing phenomenally well, while 60% of our people are living paycheck to paycheck. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by on $15,000 a year or less. We have the highest rate of childhood poverty of almost any major country on earth, and parents all over this country worry that their kids may have a lower standard of living than they do. That is the economic reality. And what Donald Trump did is provided an explanation. He went around, he said, I know you're angry, and the reason is that zillions of illegal immigrants are coming over, and they're eating your cats and dogs and everything else. That's the reason. Well, obviously, that is not the reason. The reason is, in my view, that we have an unprecedented level of corporate greed today, more income and wealth inequality, and people on top want it all. And we need an agenda that says to the working class, we're going to take on these powerful special interests and create an economy and a government that works for you. And by the way, that can't happen unless you get big money out of politics. We got to get rid of the Citizens United Supreme Court decision so billionaires do not continue to buy elections.
It's safe to say that Senator Bernie Sanders is not happy. It's also safe to say that the Democratic establishment is not happy with his assessment of what happened. They clearly took it as an insult. And let's review some of the things that Bernie Sanders says. His basic message is, look, the Democratic establishment has abandoned the working class. And when you look at parts of their strategy, when it comes to the election, that is somewhat true. I mean, they put a lot of effort into the suburbs, into a different demographic, and put less effort into what used to be their base, which is the working class. You decide whether that's good or bad. Electorally and strategically, it wasn't necessarily a bad decision because those suburban voters, those more highly educated voters, just tend to vote more. Didn't work out this election, but that's one of the reasons why I thought Kamala was going to win, even though I don't like the idea that the Democratic Party is kind of walking away from the working class. But let's look at some of the things that Bernie Sanders stated. He said 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. 60%. That means there's certain things that you cannot do, basic essential things that you cannot do until you get your next paycheck. It means you don't have a savings. 60% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. That's terrible. All right. 25% of elderly people are trying to get by, are trying to live on $15,000 a year or less. And I'll be honest with you, I didn't take that issue seriously enough until I talked to one of my mentors who works with seniors. My grandmother was in a senior home, but she had so much family she was always taken care of. But for the people who don't have family, it can get ugly for seniors. I mean, I was talking to the sister I was talking about before, and she was telling me how she knew that some elderly people really were eating cat food and things of that nature because they just didn't have enough to get by. And I think America has to, in some way, be judged by how we treat the elderly, how we treat the poor. And that's just a very bad look. All right. It's something we all should care about. I even talked about within my neighborhood, almost like adopting an elderly person in the neighborhood, having everybody do that. I hadn't moved forward with it yet, but it's something that comes to mind when I see that those numbers. Something else that he mentioned was high rates of childhood poverty. For established nations like ourselves, we have a very high rate of childhood poverty and a very high rate of income inequality. He also said we need to get big money out of politics. Let me say one of the things that really impacted me this year, and it's something I've been on for a while, but I got to see it face to face. My family and I took a road trip to Missouri, from Atlanta to Missouri, for a family reunion. All right. As we drove and kind of drove through parts of, the Midwest, it was heartbreaking to see town after town that had been completely stripped of industry. And I live in the city. I live in Atlanta. But I'm thinking, if I grew up and lived in one of these towns that used to have industry, where people used to be making a decent living, and it's all gone overseas because of much of the establishment on the left and the right, I would probably be hot. I mean, I was hurt just driving through town after town with empty structures everywhere, dilapidated, houses, roads, all that stuff. And I'm thinking, what if I lived and grew up or still lived in these places? I would probably be very upset. And I think people are very upset. Now, one of the things, and I said I would talk about this again, I'm going to bring it up. One of the things that I find to be unacceptable coming from a lot of people in the establishment, or just the people who copy whatever the establishment says or repeat whatever the establishment says, is the idea that the economy was fine, inflation had gone down, the job numbers had gone up, the economy was fine, and these people had been tricked by Trump into thinking that the economy wasn't working for them. Guys, it's hard for me to think of a more condescending, arrogant assertion that this 60% of people who are living paycheck to paycheck, that this large group of people who cannot afford housing, who are spending almost 40, 50% of their income on housing, to tell them, no, our experts said that the economy is fine. Don't worry about what you see with your eyes. Don't worry about what you go through on a day-to-day basis. Our experts who nitpick certain statistics and whatever said everything's good, so you're good, but you're just not smart enough to see through that Trump tricked you into thinking there's a bad economy when the economy is actually good. Yeah, I know you couldn't afford those eggs. I know, after you bought those eggs, you struggled to pay for something else. But the economy is really fine. You just need to listen to us and our experts, and you would know that even though it seems like you're doing bad, you're actually doing very good. That's what I'm hearing from a lot of people in the Democrat establishment and elsewhere when people say they voted on the economy and they voted because they're not in a good position. You can't look at the housing market. Even if you find some expert that said it's gone down a couple percentage points, people are struggling for housing, especially in urban areas that are run by Democrats. Now, do I think Republicans, if they were in urban areas, they would be running them much better? No, I have no reason to believe that. But you need to take some type of responsibility for that. And you need to think about if you want your party to become the party of the professional class, because that's what it's becoming. People need to think through those things and not just be so dismissive of people who are living paycheck to paycheck when they say, I don't like how this has gone. Now, here's the other thing that I'll say. Do I think that Trump has some magic button that he's going to push to make all this go away and make it all better? No. I don't think he did that the first time. But that's not the same thing as me telling somebody who's going through, who believes the economy and sees the economy and feels the economy is not working for them, that they're just imagining this or they've just been tricked by Trump. Really need to think through some of those things. Let me see if I can give you some other statistics. I was reading through Unusual Whales, which is an account I follow on Twitter or X, whatever you want to call it. And it said that baby boomers, not Gen Z, are now the main generation holding down multiple jobs to make ends meet. Baby boomers. These are people in their 70s and things of that nature, right? It says that some 1.3 million people aged between 55 and 64, they're saying 55 and 64, I said 70, excuse me. Some 1.3 million people aged between 55 and 64 worked multiple jobs at once in 2023. Are they doing that just because they got tricked? I don't know. Maybe I'm missing something. But again, here's another one of those. A quarter of Americans have almost no monthly savings. This is the paycheck to paycheck. As more people are living paycheck to paycheck, and that's Bank of America saying that no monthly savings. I mean, you can dismiss it, but I think dismissing it in the way that some people who are trying to use this as part of their cope might be unfaithful. Might mean might mean that you are ignoring the pain of people so that you can keep your narrative and act like your candidate was perfect. I've heard people say Kamala ran a perfect campaign. I think it was Joy Reid said she ran a perfect campaign. It was just everybody else's fault. I mean, if you want to maintain your narratives, maintain your narratives. If you want to maintain, hey, these people are always the bad guys, so when anything goes wrong, I'm always going to blame them, then do what you want to do. But I think it would behoove most of us to step back, step away from our knee-jerk reactions, step away from our favorite influencers who are completely unhinged right now, and it's clear that they have been lying to you for months. Some of them guaranteeing wins, some of them talking about how great everything was in the campaign. Either they didn't know or they knew and they lied to you. But I would advise you to step away from them, get away from electoral politics right now, get in the word, and build some relationships, maybe even with some people who voted for the other candidate, right? Because your cope isn't going to change the reality. It's just going to make you more and more unrealistic. Now, I am going to be interested to see where this conversation within the Democratic Party goes. I would like the Democratic Party to get away from its kind of Nancy Pelosi focus, even though, let me say this, I don't completely agree with Bernie Sanders either. I'm not a democratic socialist. I think a lot of what they do sounds good in theory, but it's very unrealistic and doesn't really have a depth of understanding of human nature. People have to work for things. People should have opportunities to work for things and get education, but you can't just give people everything that they ask for because it's just human nature. It doesn't work well. And most people, I believe, do want to work. So we don't have to give them everything like some democratic socialists seem to suggest. So that's just my position on it. But I am interested to see how this works out, what type of candidates the Democratic Party is going to run from here on out. And I'll say this, too. The Republican Party is very foolish if they think that this win or this coalition that they put together is going to be a lasting coalition if they don't do right by the people in this particular moment. They're going to have to do right by the people. If they don't fulfill some of the promises that they made, they're going to be in trouble too. So the Democrats and Republicans, we're going to see how this works out. We'll see how the Democrats respond to this massive loss. And I'm going to talk about that a little more in the premium episode. This was a big loss. This was a big reality check. The problem is some people are still trying to avoid reality. But I'm asking you to have composure and to see things for what they are. We'll be right back on the Church Politics Podcast.
Your eyes on the times, you walk ready to speak up. But with so many problems, you're exhausted trying to keep up.
This is the Church Politics Podcast, where you can get political commentary from a biblical worldview. We're not trying to be conservative or progressive. We're trying to be Christian in the public square.
And I'm black as heaven. I'm made in God's image. Nobody can change my settings. Amen. Got off my knees and put an end to my search. It's easy to sell your soul when you don't know what it's worth. And
we're back on the Church Politics Podcast. Well, with every presidential win comes a new administration. And as we saw throughout this campaign, a lot of people in Trump's former administration, including his vice president, are no longer in his corner. In fact, went so far as to say that he should not be selected as the president. He had people from the military, a whole bunch of folks that were in his administration that worked with him day to day, including the vice president, who, let's be honest, Pence stuck by Trump as long as he could. Pence, in my opinion, took some L's as far as his credibility for how long he stuck by Trump and defended some of the things that Trump was doing. And then it just went too far with January 6th. And now Pence basically was saying, hey, this is not a person that should be in office. Now, the people didn't listen to those folks, but there's a lot of folks that said, I will not work for him again. And he's a dangerous person to be in office. Some folks would call that just political. I can't say that with Pence. I think, although I have a lot of disagreements with Pence, what he did in response to January 6th and certifying all the things that he had to do, I got to respect that, even with our disagreements. So when somebody like that says, hey, I can't support this, to me, I think we have to take that seriously. The people decided to overlook that, and he's back in office. But as he puts together his second administration, it's not going to have a lot of folks who were there before. All right, and we got to take a very close look. This is an important moment as he puts together this administration, because he brought together an interesting coalition, whether it be RFK, whether it be Tulsi Gabbard, folks like that, Elon Musk, all these folks he kind of brought together. Now, the first piece of his administration that we know, obviously, is his vice president. That's the person he ran with, J.D. Vance. J.D. Vance, actually, during the campaign, it was said that he had very low favorability. Now it's being said out of the four candidates, including the vice presidential candidate and the presidential candidate on the Democrats, that he has the highest favorability. I think that debate did a lot of good for him. I think the Joe Rogan podcast that he went on did a lot of good for him. And I'll be honest with you, if y'all been listening to this podcast for years, then the pre-MAGA J.D. Vance was somebody that I actually was interested in what he would become. I watched a lot of what he was doing, read a lot of what he was doing, and was impressed by it. Something happened, obviously, when he ran for Senate in Ohio. In my opinion, the MAGA train was the only train leaving the station, and he jumped on it. Do I respect that and how he conducted himself in that regard? No. But I can't say that he's not a thoughtful person, and how that kind of reform conservatism has questioned some of the economic orthodoxy coming from Republicans. For Republicans, for decades and decades, it's been about Reagan and Reaganomics, and reform conservatives like J.D. Vance and others started to question that orthodoxy and actually think about how you can include working people more so, and why we're ending up with so much income equality in America. And I think if you look at what they were trying to do, I think even a lot of Democrats will say they have some good ideas. Again, we'll see if that has any impact on the administration. But Trump did seem to run on that. Trump did seem to run on that idea that Republicans have to change the way that they look at the economy. Well, he kind of ran on that the first time too. I don't think he necessarily, outside of some of the trade deals, did what he said he was going to do, but we'll see what happens this time. So the first piece of that team was Vice President J.D. Vance, who initially I didn't think was being very much of an asset to the campaign. But after that debate, and I said this too, and we don't have to talk the whole episode about how many things I got wrong, but I said, usually vice presidential candidates don't do anything for the campaign. I think that might have given them some momentum coming out. That was such a dominant performance by J.D. Vance. It might have given them some momentum coming out of that debate. I don't know, but I think his interviews and some of the things that he was doing became very much an asset for for Trump. And we'll see how much influence he's able to wield over an administration that's coming together to be quite interesting. So that's the first part. There were rumors that he had already selected Senator Rubio, and this was the New York Times reported this, that he had selected Senator Rubio to be his Secretary of State. I'm not seeing that confirmed. So there were reports, but it hasn't been confirmed by Trump like some of these other folks have been. All right. So one selection was a very important selection is Pete Hegseth. Pete Hegseth has been selected as the Secretary of Defense. He's a 44-year-old co-host of Fox News's Fox and Friends on the weekend and has been a contributor to that network since 2014, but also has a background in the military, although they're saying he lacks a senior military or national security experience. Interesting pick. One thing that I'm hearing that we know about Hegseth is he is committed to ending the war in Ukraine. So I know there'll be a lot of establishment Republicans who aren't too happy about that. But Pete Hegseth is the choice, as I understand it, for Secretary of Defense. Now, these folks are going to have to go through the Senate and all that stuff. So keep that in mind. The next choice I was thoroughly disappointed in, but Kristi Noem, who is the governor of South Dakota, I believe, was selected as the Secretary of Homeland Security. Homeland Security is one of the largest, if not the largest, law enforcement organizations in the world. Kristi Noem, although she has been very loyal to Trump, has in some cases been kind of like an attack dog for Trump. I don't see her as being the right person for that very important position. And let me say this, you got Department of Homeland Security, there's a lot. She takes over a lot of things, right? Dealing with immigration, dealing with how we treat people who are in rough situations. This is a position where the person at the head needs to be very clear. We want law and order, so to speak, but we also have to have compassion. And what I've seen of her, and I'm not an expert on her, she's more of a adversarial, hard line against immigration, all that stuff. And that's cool. That's to some extent the people asked for hard line immigration policies by putting Trump in office because that's what he promised to do. But I don't see the thoughtfulness that I would want to see for somebody in that position. So I don't think that was a good choice for Homeland Security Secretary at all. And I'm not saying I think any of these are great. I'm just saying that one particularly sticks out to me as no. Why are we doing that? William McGinley has been selected as the White House counsel. So he'll be the White House cabinet secretary during Trump. He was the White House cabinet secretary during Trump's first administration, and had been outside legal counsel for, I think, the RNC and other folks. Okay. Here's an interesting one. John Ratcliffe has been selected as the CIA director. Now, there were some rumors going around that there were some strange characters being considered for the CIA role, but it looks like Trump has picked John Ratcliffe, who is a former Texas congressman and who served as the director of national intelligence during the first administration. So this does point out, although there were people from the first administration that aren't coming back, that don't think Trump should have been in office, there are some folks who were in lower roles that are being brought to take some more major roles. All right. Here's another one, an interesting one. Mike Huckabee has been named ambassador to Israel. And everybody knows Mike Huckabee is a big evangelical Christian, a big Zionist. I don't necessarily agree with everything he's had to say about Israel. I think he's gone too far a little bit on some of this stuff. But hey, that's the position he's been put in. And for some of you younger folks, you might not even remember that that Huckabee was the governor of Arkansas for a long time. And so he'll be the ambassador to Israel, a staunch, as it says, as AP mentioned, a staunch defender of Israel. And that's kind of a hat tip to folks who are big on that issue. Here's another one. Here's one of the issues that we're trying to figure out. Trump ran very much as, I'm one of the people who's going to stop these wars. I'm going to stop these wars. Now, that's not popular with a lot of establishment Republicans who tend to be more neoconservative. And what I mean by neoconservatives, these are the folks who are kind of war hawks. They believe in America being the hegemon who uses its influence and uses its military might to kind of structure the way that the world works in a lot of ways. And so when Trump comes in and says, hey, I don't want a lot of American interventions and things of that nature, those are folks who are kind of, even within his own party, pushing back on that. So the question was, when he brings in these folks who are going to be kind of overseeing our national security, what type of people will they be? Will they be the Tulsi Gabbards? Will they be people who are closer to where J.D. Vance is on some of these issues? Or will he kind of give some love to the establishment, to the neoconservatives? And Mike Waltz has been named as the National Security Advisor. Now, Waltz is a retired Army National Guard officer. He's a war veteran. And he's very much, from what I can tell, a neoconservative, somebody who's going to be more interested in those type of interventions, in America having more of a hand and a heavier hand in a lot of international military conflicts. So that to some people was a surprise, because it's like, hey, you ran as if you were pushing against, kind of the neoconservative point of view. Now you put somebody into your administration who represents that point of view. We'll see where it goes. Another interesting choice was his chief of staff choice, which he ends up picking Susie Wiles. Susie Wiles is the first female chief of staff. She's 67. She was a senior advisor to Trump's presidential campaign this time around. And really, some people are saying, and it's listed in AP that way, in the Associated Press, that she was kind of the de facto campaign manager. Wiles, I guess, comes out of Florida politics and helped Ron DeSantis win his first race. But it's hard to say that Trump didn't. If she was the campaign manager de facto, it's hard to say she didn't run a very, very strong race. So hat tip, I guess, first female chief of staff. All right. Another interesting one is Tom Homan has been named as the border czar.